Recording. All right, there we go. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Virtual Health Coaches Journal Club for May 2021. We're here with Daniel Viscovin, who will be guiding us through this awesome article today.
Hi, everyone. Awesome. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. We'll hop into it. We have a pretty dense article review today. I'm pretty excited about this one. It's got a lot of good stuff that I think is really applicable to us as coaches. So I always forget where the presentation button is. I think it's always hidden.
I think it's view, under view, full screen. Oh, there you go.
There we go. Excellent. Okay, just got to move this. So yeah, first off, a shout out. I don't know if Maddie gets to see these or not, but we have Virtual Health Coaches has an intern, Maddie, who is very helpful in putting our presentations together. So a big time helpful shout out to her for supporting us as we do this. So this month's journal club topic, you can see here, is on the topic of self-regulation without force. Can awareness leverage reward to drive behavior change? And it's done in part by one of my favorite professors, Dr. Judson Brewer, who is a very big in the space of mindfulness and previously more so addiction, but now looking into positive health promotion and health behavior change is where he's starting to focus his research. So for our presentation today, we have a lot of information. Please, at any time, if you have any questions, comments, or questions, please feel free to pop on and ask. And then once we get through this, I'll try to get through it at a good pace. We can have a discussion to follow up if we'd like to do that. So let's go ahead and get started. So this is the overall sense to this paper in general. And it's bringing awareness to one's subjective experience and behavior that can produce a change in valuation of learned but unhealthy behaviors, leading to self-regulatory shifts that result in sustained behavior change without force. There's a whole lot of words there, a lot of meaningful words that we're going to end up breaking down and further understanding each subcomponent of this as we look through the paper today. So that at a high level is the understanding that subjective experience and behavior meet together. And ultimately, these learned responses that we have, some we call them habits, can be changed and in a way that's approached without the necessary, willpower or force that we think of has to be done. And that's where this paper is going. So more at a high level still is our abstract. So I'm just going to go top to bottom on these. To reach long-term goals and live aligned with our values, people typically must regulate their behavior. Often in the past, we know that comes from effortful self-control. So a forceful struggle between lower level impulses and higher level cognitive control processes has been the science to date to understand how we regulate our behavior. One piece to the puzzle is autonomous motivation. So that's doing something because it has value congruency or is intrinsically satisfying to ourselves. And we'll get much more into that in this paper. A possible mechanistic convergence between brain and behavior that is consistent with a shift from forced to unforced behavior change. So that's looking at the ideas in this paper. We'll talk about what are the underlying mechanisms between the brain, our body, and the behaviors that we're doing or triggered by. We'll get into the mechanics of it to understand how we go from very difficult forced or externally forced to something that's easier to do unforced. Through bringing awareness to one's subjective experience, that's how it feels in the moment, and behavior, changes in valuation of unhealthy learned behaviors can be produced. So that's the biggest piece of the puzzle we're going to be identifying towards the end of the paper is the changes in valuation of the unhealthy learned behaviors. And what that means is, how is that behavior for us when we talk about changes in valuation? And that'll be broken down a little bit. So leading to self-regulatory shifts that result in sustained behavior change, again, without force. That's the whole topic of this paper is how do we make, ultimately, even though it's not said, maybe it's implied, that making behavior change easier down the road for our clients or even ourselves. So let's break into the introduction. The ability to regulate behavior in line with long-term goals and values is crucial to our mental and physical health. And the authors talk about why a little bit later on. Despite using well-known self-control strategies, many people have difficulties with behavior change. Us as coaches know that, and ultimately that's why we're in this profession, to help people. So previously in the past, willpower, this idea of willpower, right, or effortful self-control in the sciences has been challenged as a driver behind behavior change. So they thought really that was the key, but now we're learning, and this paper does a great job in challenging that notion, that it's not always willpower that's the biggest piece to the puzzle for solving behavior change. So this article suggests that an alternative approach of using autonomous motivation, mindfulness, and reinforcement learning can lead to more sustainable behavior change. And we're going to dive deep into each three of those coming up. This approach can be applied to all positive domains, but for the topic of this paper and the topic of this discussion, we're going to focus on health behaviors. And that's what they do in the paper as well, which is really nice. It aligns with what we are looking for. So let's go from effortful self-control to autonomous behavior change. We're going to need to break down some components of that first. So habits that contradict long-term goals are often strongly formed through reinforcement learning, making self-regulation difficult. What's this idea of reinforcement learning? It's the habit loop, and it's made up of three basic parts. We can have the trigger, the behavior, and the result. So something in our life triggers us to perform some action, leading to some result that we get following that action. That is the reinforcement learning or the habit loop. When an action is reinforced by a pleasant result or avoidance of an unpleasant result, the brain encodes a memory of the action and the circumstance under which it occurred. That's how behavior is learned. We'll talk a little bit more about this cache effect later on, but for now we know that over time, when it gets stored as a memory, that's how we know that behavior to whatever it is, if it's negative or positive, occurs over time and is how it's learned. So these circumstances become a trigger to repeat the same action, even though the behavior may not be aligned with long-term goals and values. That's why we can see negative habits are a thing, right? They may not be aligned with what we want, but we continue to do them over and over again. So this is a great model we won't spend too much time on. It took me a while to grasp my head around it, but I think I have a grasp of it. So we can see on the left, misaligned with goals is one path, that's A. We have another path aligned with goals, that's B. So we can see it starts with the trigger in the middle. And from a trigger, again, that's a stimulus in our environment, something that occurs to us. There are two paths that we can go. We can go the path of misalignment, which in this example, the trigger is stress, and the misaligned path is eating cake that they use in this example. So on path A, we have eat cake, and the results are what they call the hedonic reward, pleasure and stress. But because we went to the left, eating cake is misaligned with our goals. It's something we don't actually want to do too often on a day-to-day basis. However, it's the habit that we were put into. On the right side is aligned with goals. So we have the trigger. We go down to behavior on the right. In this case, it was eating some fruit as a response. Again, you can see in that box in the middle on the right, it can be effortful. It can be forced. That's the external stimulus saying, oh, we should eat that fruit. And that's where they talk about this being path B. It is aligned with our goals. However, not necessarily the easiest for us to do or for this person in this situation. They did ultimately get the reward, which was the satisfaction with the goal alignment. But also the very last couple words there in this is I always have a hard time saying that word, but it's the punishment technically associated with it, the unpleasant feeling of the effort that was needed to do that. And that's what these researchers are looking to make a change in. With another path we'll see later called path C. So now we talk about the willpower-based approaches. So just to break down the effortful self-control or willpower, those terms we can go hand in hand. It's framed as a forceful inner struggle between higher level cognitive control processes and lower level automatic or habitual tendencies. When we talk about restraint and effortful self-control, it can feel averse and be cognitively costful or costly, right? When we'll take the example here, forcefully restraining oneself from eating tempting but high-calorie comfort foods to avoid dietary sugar. So there's the example of willpower, and knowing that it's the idea that we can butt our heads against willpower, excuse my expression, but when we continue to do that and we continue to push against this idea of willpower, we can see down at the bottom what that can lead to. And that's the use or overuse of restraint, pushing against, and effortful self-control strategies have been associated with poor psychological health, breakdown under stress or strong emotions, and the disruption of the natural regulation of body functions. So I think what this part of the paper is really trying to tell us here is that willpower is not the most ideal strategy for supporting behavior change, because as we continue to have to push and push and push, it can lead to the issues down at the bottom we see there. So what they'll ultimately do is discuss different strategies. So the last piece of it is avoiding triggers for habitual behavior can be effective, but of course, right, but can still feel effortful, may feel limiting, and constrain behavior in undesired ways. An example of that would be avoiding certain social gatherings one would have liked to attend. So the habit loop still exists, which may cause latent habits to reemerge later under the influence of stress. And that's one thing that's important about the concept of willpower, right? Perhaps we have willpower at high willpower at times, in which we follow through with the behaviors we want. However, under the same trigger later on, willpower we can't rely on if we don't have it. So we can't rely on it on all times. So rewarding oneself for good behavior and punishing for bad behavior may only lead to effective regulation as long as the reinforcement contingencies are in place. That's just another way of, I think, what I said right there is that we have to have a constant level of willpower all the time if we want to succeed with this strategy, which perhaps some may find as a way to do it. But in the grand scheme of things, it's most likely not going to work for all people, and myself included. That isn't a strategy that would work for me. So now we're going to get into one of the big topics that they talk about in this paper, which is autonomous self-regulation. And again, we're going kind of through the big chunks, defining things right now. Later on in this paper, we're going to get into the strategies and how we support clients in changing behavior. So autonomous self-regulation is the concept of being motivated to act in a goal-congruent way, such as an inner struggle or avoidance of triggers, such that an inner struggle or avoidance of triggers would not be necessary. So acting in alignment with our goals so that willpower is not necessary. Autonomy means to act in line with self-endorsed values, needs, and intentions. We can see that there's less conflict between longer-term goals and impulses or habits for autonomous behavior. So one's impulses are aligned with goals and values, helping drive behavior in a desired direction. So this idea of autonomous self-regulation just means that we are working in a way that we want. That's the autonomy component of it, but also in line with our personal goals and values. So cognitive control processes are still needed during the autonomous behavior, but less than needed in effortful control, which a key piece there is our first step in shifting down and making it a little bit less easier is making sure that we're focusing. And that's ultimately what path B was, right? We do have control in a direction moving us to our goals, but it's still not the easiest it can be. Autonomy can apply to the level of action implementation and the level of goal selection. So the same behavior can be carried out more or less autonomously. Increasing autonomy can lead individuals to choose different goals. So there's two different but big points there, is that over time, the same behavior we do can ultimately then become more or less autonomous, just depending upon the awareness and intention we'll talk about that goes into it. And then increasing autonomy, I think it's a big one here. Increasing autonomy can lead people to choose different goals. Well, if someone, a client of ours, feels societal pressure to do one thing, but then we allow for autonomy to be explored, and they realize, no, I want to do something else. There's a prime example of leading individuals to choose different goals. So autonomously motivated behavior change has been proven more successful than willpower-based efforts in the following areas: weight loss, exercise, and smoking cessation. And we probably know from our studies and our schoolwork in health coaching, self-determination theory is where autonomous motivation comes from. So self-determination theory proposes that autonomy is not an all or nothing phenomenon, but those actions range on a continuum from non-autonomous to autonomous. So individuals experience the most autonomy when they are completely intrinsically motivated. So that motivation is coming from within. And also autonomous motivation can be fostered from within. So one key point here is applying more present moment awareness during automatic, habitual, or extrinsically controlled behaviors may be sufficient for producing a more autonomous, less effortful regulation. So there's one link in the paper that they give us right away that discusses the mindfulness or awareness during a habit can lead to less effort or more autonomy. That's just one key insight they give us, but we'll go into more later. So this is a great chart to kind of sum up the relationship between the behaviors and motivations and the effort and self-regulation. So on the top, you can see non-autonomous to autonomous. So ranging from that scale, we can see on the left, we don't have that control. It's not in alignment with our goals. On the right, autonomous, we have a sense of control over it and it is in alignment with our goals. Next level down is motivation. On the left, we have lacking motivation or amotivation. In the middle is extrinsic, meaning that motivation is coming from outside of us. So that could be we're looking for reward. Somebody's giving us something in return for behaviors that we're doing. And then intrinsic motivation on the right, we know is that motivation is coming from within. It's a sense of enjoyment of doing something, an internal reward for it. And then lastly, we see the perceived effort. That's what we want to get to, right? Is how do we make it easier to do behaviors? So it's an interesting little chart there going from less, more, less. So less effort on the left, we can see the characteristics that align with it are following goal misaligned impulses. So doing things that aren't in alignment with where we want to go. We maybe have some incompetence, so we have a complete lack of control over the situation. I just don't want to do it, that kind of thing, and so the effort would be low. It would take then more effort in the middle when someone is telling us what to do. We're working for an external reward. Some of the characteristics there are compliance, right? Having to do what somebody else is telling us to do. The external rewards or punishments might we add. The ego's involved. There's some self-control that's needed, which is why it's more effortful. On the right, as we move to intrinsic, that's where we start to see the goal alignment, which we can perceive as being good, right? We want to move towards our health goals. And it's also less effortful. So that's where we want to move to. So shifting into congruence, awareness, interest, enjoyment, and inherent satisfaction. So I just thought I think they did a great job with this chart just to show us that the three layers there and at the bottom, what kind of characteristics go into it. Before we move on, maybe just if anybody has one or two questions, thoughts, comments, otherwise we'll continue forward. Okay, I feel good. Please stop me at any time. I know I get on a roll when I'm doing these, so interject if necessary. Okay, so let's move into now what the authors of this paper will be proposing as the approach to support that self-regulation. So a mechanistic model for self-regulation through awareness. So many influential theories of behavior regulation emphasize the awareness of stimuli, subjective experience, and behavior as they occur. So what would that mean? That being the awareness of the trigger, what we're experiencing to it, and what behavior we're ultimately doing. So the power of present-centered awareness lies in bringing information into consciousness that is necessary for healthy self-regulation to occur. So one key big boulder here is taking something that's unconscious, something that we're doing on automatic autopilot without thinking, and bringing it to the forefront and considering it and trying to understand it further. And that's going to be a lot of the approaches that we look to support clients. So awareness creates a mental gap between the perceiver, somebody doing the action, the contents of consciousness, and one's behavior. Without awareness, thoughts, emotions, and impulses might immediately link with action tendencies that unfold automatically. And the example is just shouting out at somebody when you're angry without even thinking about it, right? And that may not be congruent with the goal that you want of whatever, if you want to be a good person or you want to foster your relationship, etc. With this idea of awareness, an individual can detach from these processes, recognize and observe them, and then choose how to react or how to act. So choosing to stay calm instead of shouting. So I think the great quote from Viktor Frankl comes into my mind. There is that space between stimulus and response, and in that space lies our freedom to choose, etc. It's that idea of in the moment, some mindfulness and awareness. So mindfulness training promotes a non-judgmental, present-centered awareness that can promote behavior change by capitalizing on that mental gap. And it's commonly fostered in training programs through encouraging an attitude of curiosity and acceptance. And that's one way, but what I'm excited is these researchers go a step further for what us coaches could be able to apply, and we'll see that. Behavior change through awareness may also be mediated by a more accurate assessment of reward value of specific actions. So that's an important piece, is we can also bring awareness to what we're receiving as a result of the actions that we take. Is it good? Is it bad? What's it feel to us? Simply bringing awareness to an actual experience of habitual behavior can significantly affect the subjective reward value of behavior and foster behavior change. I think that's one of our biggest scientific moments here, and we'll break down the neuroscience actually in a moment, which is really cool. But it's the idea of let's bring awareness to the experience of the behavior, but then when we do that, it's actually going to be able to change the reward that we perceive to it. So the example there is when an individual paid attention to their moment-to-moment experience when smoking cigarettes, they noticed an unpleasant taste and smell that they were not aware of previously, which is an excellent step. If we tie in other theories of the trans-theoretical model, we know that can start making some changes, just something like that. Mindfulness directly targets core links in the reinforcement process, which we'll be going into soon. Core principles of reinforcement learning. So the acquisition and persistence of habitual behavior depends on its reward value, an important piece there. The stability of a behavior depends upon the reward's value changes over time, and if other more rewarding values or more rewarding behaviors become accessible. So what these points here are talking about is that it's the driver in our brains, in our neurosystem, is linked to the reward that we receive from them. Think about just a quick example would be the hot stove. And as a kid touches the hot stove, that reward is getting burned. It's a punishment, I guess you could say. But that's going to be a driver for knowing, well, I shouldn't touch that, moving on, right? So that's ultimately a value. So values, not so much in what we value, but more so this idea of what's brought about. It's a different way of using the word value. What's brought about the reward value. Value is processed in a certain part of the brain. We can see that shown here. A lot of fancy words for the brain. But what's important about that is that the activity in these regions has been shown to correlate with reward value of different behavior options and can drive decision making. So this is where we see the idea of neuroplasticity coming into play with behavior change. So the reward value is a composite of many different factors. It can be updated by learning, which is what can occur during coaching. And it also depends on the external rewards and punishments and internal factors. So we should soon have, there it is, perfect. So this is the idea of neuroplasticity at play. It's one of the coolest things I think about this paper, is that subjective value representation in the brain can be changed through increasing awareness. I'm going to say that one more time. The subjective value representation in the brain, those neural networks, can actually be changed through increasing awareness. That's one of the biggest key scientific pieces, I think, behind this article. We can see there on the left, starting with the bold lines that say assessing the value of. We can see if we're taking path A, it's goal misaligned, and it's a habit. It's eating that cake when we feel stressed. on the left scale there is the sugar rush, and it feels great to have it, right? That's our perceived value. It feels good. Now the increasing awareness intervention can shift, and from there we can have the neural activation in the brain increase more when let's see, I want to make sure I'm saying this correctly for us. Your processes. So it can reduce that urge, right? So what we're trying to do is change, and from those scales that we see there, I get mixed up in this a little bit, is we're trying to go from reducing the value of the punishment associated with path A, and we're trying to increase the value of the reward and good feeling associated with path B. When we go from A to B, we get introduced to path C, something that we haven't seen yet, but inherently has been discussed. And that's a goal-aligned autonomous behavior that is not forceful or does not require willpower. And when we do that, we can see the activation in the brain occur in that goal alignment, freshness, without the feeling of guilt, without the feeling of frustration, sadness, etc. Does anybody have any questions on that? I got a little lost in the weeds there in a moment, and I apologize. How do we feel about it?
I think good.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's hard to like wrap your head around and
Yeah,
speak through it, so no worries.
So the biggest piece, the biggest boulder there is understanding the mechanism of increasing awareness supports us in reducing the willpower necessary, inherently making it easier to go along the goal-aligned path that we want, the feeling good about making the healthy habit changes. So when we talk about the role of awareness in updating composite reward value, the authors briefly discussed this topic of, model systems and model free. We'll touch on it just for a moment. It is important for us to speak to. I use this idea of model free. So when a habitual behavior is learned, its composite reward value is stored in a cache format so that it can be effectively and efficiently retrieved. So that's a part of the learning process. It's the example, eating a cake at a celebration early in life. Like we grow up going to birthday parties and we have cake, right? Well, that starts to become in our brains the stored memory that cake and celebration go together, right? And we do that. We always do that. Well, later in life, eating cake during celebration may be misaligned with our current value system of wanting to, whatever it is, be healthy or whatever goals you may have. So to change behavior, individuals need to accurately update information on how rewarding a behavior is currently. So it's the growth and learning process down the road of updating, and that's where the neuroplasticity piece comes into play also. So there is a double-edged sword of learning, right? The learning in life makes it easier, makes something like the cake and the celebration just easier to take moving forward, less brain power to have to function, requiring few cognitive resources, but it becomes difficult to change because of the inflexibility of it. It starts to become rigid as we grow older over time. So that's a double-edged sword in nature there. It makes us efficient, but harder to change, which is important for us to know. So bringing present moment awareness or mindful awareness to current behaviors is instrumental for new learning and updating the reward value of habitual behaviors. To update that reward value, experiencing the effective correlates and consequences of behavior in the present moment is crucial. So now we're making this transition. For the past couple minutes, first half of this presentation, we've been talking about the kind of the science and mechanism underlying how awareness can influence and support. Now we're going to transition into how's it done? How can we do it? How can we support? And this is our first key insight, is that to update that reward value, awareness needs to be done in the present moment, and that's crucial when doing those behaviors. So awareness will foster realization of immediate consequences associated with the behavior and the effective experience while the behavior is carried out. So now we're moving into the 7 points. They call them testable. These is theory based. This is built upon science. Theories proposed by Dr. Judd Brewer and his, I believe, his graduate students. How these 7 points in which awareness can be brought about to help reduce that self-regulation needed, or what we'll call unforced self-regulation. So there are 7 points of intervention that we can use, clients can use, in which present-centered awareness can be applied to shift behavior from that goal incongruent automatic behavior, that was path A, to goal congruent yet effortfully controlled, that was path B, where this still takes willpower, to goal congruent autonomous behavior, path C, where we make it easier to do, less willpower needed, hopefully more success down the road. The order of the interventions are temporal in nature when we discuss them, which the behavior generally unfolds. However, that may not be the case in real world, as things get a little bit messier in the real world and things may need to change. So studies have shown that using mindfulness training to foster awareness can help shift individuals to path C and can decrease cravings. Just one more keynote into the science of the use of these. So here's that figure 4 that we talked about right before we hopped on the call. There's a lot going on in this figure. You can see it's built upon a figure that sort of built upon a figure that we've seen previously. However, it's changed just a little bit. Now we have the 3 paths there. You can see path A, path B down the middle at the bottom, and path C. Now, all the numbers and the lines are just showing us the 7 points that we're about to discuss and break into, and which direction they're going, etc. And when we talk about the subjective feeling of the client or us as we do this, the reds are constricted, depleting, or no choice, no autonomy, you could say, and the blues are more expanding, more energizing, and we have choice. So let's actually come back to this following our discussion of the 7 so that we can gain a tighter understanding of this. But for now, let's actually break into the 7 points where the awareness can support us. So the first one would be the individual becoming aware of a current behavior that is not in line with the long-term goals. I think a lot of these are more meta-awareness, something that's not going to come up in our day-to-day, which is why we have to focus and shine a spotlight on these. So this is a crucial step in motivating change because it brings awareness, because it's bringing a behavior effectively uncomfortable cognitive dissonance into awareness. There's that spotlight effect I just talked about, right? Is our clients may be doing something that they don't know is in line with their long-term goals. This is where we shine the spotlight on that. Present-centered awareness can help individuals catch themselves in the midst of an automatic behavior enactment. So what would that mean for us as coaches? What would that mean for us using this or our clients using this? So that intervention is asking ourselves or our clients to become aware of the moments in which we engage in a behavior of interest in daily life. And that's at the highest level, just at the start of a behavior and becoming more mindful and aware of it. The next point we would have would be individuals bringing awareness to the effects of their actions. So through linking action to outcome, awareness of the effects of the actions can lead to a behavioral shift by updating the behavior reward value in memory. There's that neuroplasticity piece again, the learning or changing in our brain. If the overall results of a behavior are net negative, the reward value is updated, which leads to a disenchantment with the behavior. That's where we're going to start to see subtle behavior shifts, bringing that awareness in. Understanding that it's negative can help lead to that change. So awareness of the cause and effect relationship between behavior and results is important for registering the current reward value in memory. Paying attention to negative or positive results associated with behavior can change activation in reward-related or affect-related regions in the brain. And I think that statement right there is kind of one of the most important of this whole paper is that it's well and good for us to be able to say that, like, pay attention to something will help change. But when we have the underlying fundamental neuroscience behind it, it's almost like flexing a muscle, right? The work needs to be done to elicit that change. It's not actually like a decision that can change and we're moving forward. The neuroplasticity is telling us that, through repetition and through the reinforcement of awareness is how we can support those changes in the brain. Neuroplasticity, just like our body is plastic when we exercise. At least to me, that's one of the biggest pieces. So there's a couple more points to point to before we move on. And that's simply becoming aware of reductions in pleasure may cause individuals to unlearn these behaviors through reward re-evaluation, I think I should say. Repetition of interventions at points 1 and points 2 that we just discussed cause increases in dissonance. So that feeling of non-congruency between habitual behavior and previously stored reward values. That's a change that's going on right there. It's creating a feeling of like unease, or like the word dissonance, between what we're doing and what we previously thought was valuable for us or what we wanted out of it. So the brain collects data that the behavior is not as rewarding as we previously had remembered or thought. So this intervention would be then asking participants to mindfully engage in a behavior and note how they feel and what consequences they noticed of that behavior. So now we're stepping into what's going on after the behavior. So we'll move into point 3 here, and that's individuals become aware of what typically triggers their behavior. So now we're actually looking at before, or what happens before they do that habit or the behavior, and that's the trigger, the stimulus. So awareness of triggers can leverage the updated reward value from point 2 to induce successful behavior change when a trigger is encountered. So it may help break behavioral patterns and shift from automatically and habitually acting to becoming more aware. When we think of aware, we think of this idea of autonomy. We can then choose to act in goal alignment of the trigger and the action. So triggers usually do not come into consciousness until the habit loop is more fully understood and mapped out in a direct experience, which is why they didn't place this point first. And the first thing to do, look at the trigger. The first thing we want to do is actually look at our behavior and outcome. Then we can start to identify perhaps the trigger and what's going on there. So our intervention there as coaches over for ourselves would be asking participants to observe and note the triggers that appear to cue the behavior of interest. So point 4 would be individuals become aware of the forceful approach used to prevent a behavior without attempting to stop the self-controlled behavior from occurring. So now we're shining our spotlight on this idea of willpower. We're having to understand, are we having to put effort into this behavior choice that we're making? So self-control through restraint or force is a common strategy to suppress goal incongruent behavior. We saw that. We know that if there's something we don't want to do, or let's see, self-control through restraint. So we have to restrain ourselves from doing things that are not good for us, right? Not good, goal incongruent. So trying to actively interfere with these self-controlled behaviors could increase the degree of effort and inner struggle. So as we have to put more effort into those were the consequences we saw earlier in this presentation of poor psychological health, etc., stress. So simply observing the subjective experience of self-control may allow individuals to better understand how unpleasant it is. That's the awareness piece. So then what we would do is ask the participant to mindfully observe whenever they are forcefully trying to engage in some behavior or refrain from doing something by detecting the subjective experience of struggle, frustration, or force, etc. And this, let's keep in mind, this could be either way. This could be path A, where they're doing something that is not goal, that they're eating the cake, not goal alignment, and they're struggling to not eat the cake. I've been there. I have a feeling we've all been there. It's like it's sitting in the fridge. I don't want to eat it, but I eat it. Path B is doing something in alignment with our goals. We don't really want to do it, but we know we should, is that feeling. So it's just bringing that internal monologue, shining a spotlight on that internal monologue, the effort and the struggle. So point 5, individuals become aware of the results of forced restraint. So effortlessly restraining or forcing behavior can bring about goal congruent results, can bring about rewarding and unrewarding results. So that we can go either direction there is what that's saying. The desire for goal incongruent behaviors might become inhibited in the short term, but may reemerge when self-control is released or temptation is too strong. Which to me, I take that as it's a muscle that we flex, not the willpower muscle per se, but the practice of becoming more aware over time. That's building the neuroplasticity in, is how I take that. Awareness may lead to downgrading the reward value of forceful regulation because of the negative side effects of it. So an individual might become disenchanted with this mode of self-regulation, the willpower, when attention is paid to the results of forcing or pressuring oneself to perform or refrain from performing the action. So for me, the way I would end up taking that, right, is it's after having to do something forceful, after having to use a lot of willpower, what came about that? Did you feel exhausted? Did you feel like, that was too much and now I need to sit and recover or something like that? That's where we're bringing the awareness piece in, is the follow-up of having to do that forceful restraint. So then we would ask participants to pay close attention to their subjective experience when forcefully trying to do something or refrain from doing something, focusing again on that effort, struggle, frustration, or force. That's where the spotlight's at. You can see that what these points are doing is building a lot of tools in our toolbox, I would say, for coaches as to the questions that we can be asked, where we prompt that spotlight of attention, perhaps for conversation or helping that client foster change. So point 6, individual has new options for goal congruent autonomous behaviors that emerge after experiencing the adverse side effects and limits of effortful self-control. So awareness of the consequences of efforts to change may cause an individual to explore other behaviors. If let's go back to that smoking example, that the mindfully smoking led to a bad taste, and there was another negative associated with that. I can't quite remember what it was, but those can be a catalyst. That bad taste, or maybe it's a yucky feeling, whatever it is, can be a seed as a catalyst for change. Building on revaluation of behavior results from path A and path B, leveraging the updated reward values for behavior change. So unforced freedom of choice emerging from embodied awareness is what the authors use in the article. So unforced freedom of choice, that's the autonomy piece, emerging from embodied awareness. So there's the link that they talk about between autonomy and awareness, providing us that unforced freedom of choice, path C. By paying attention to the drop in reward value over time, one may readily adapt an alternative behavior and pursue more rewarding goals. Path C. To increase awareness of changes in behavioral patterns, participants may be asked to pay attention or note what types of novel, unforced behaviors they're trying and how often. So now this awareness piece is looking at, well, what changes are being made? And the learning process will still occur there to understand what's going on, what are there changes happening, etc. And I believe the last point will be how we're feeling about those. Yeah, okay. So this point 6 is just bringing that attention to, are there any unforced behaviors? Is there anything that could be working for us that is less stressful, or could there be anything that's less stressful, less effortful for us? And then point 7 would then ultimately be reinforcing those. So individuals can apply present-centered awareness to update reward values in the brain when they feel the effects of new autonomously motivated behaviors. So autonomous behaviors can be accompanied by more pleasant, effective experiences and have higher reward values. And that actually occurs for 4 specific reasons. Is the people bring closer to their own goals. So they're moving it intrinsic as opposed to the goals of others or the word of others, other people telling them what to do. It can also be linked with a sense of agency and choice. That's another autonomy piece. Typically accompanying with a sense of ease, effortless, and vitality. That's reducing any willpower needed. And the authors share that the science of curiosity itself has been shown to be a rewarding value in itself. So awareness of rewarding value of autonomous behavior relative to non-autonomous behavior is necessary to drive the shift to autonomous behavior. So let's go through that one more time. Awareness of the rewarding value of autonomous behavior, that's path C, relative to the non-autonomous behavior, that could be one of the others. I guess that would end up being path A, goal incongruent, is necessary to drive the shift to autonomous behavior. So I take that as it's well and good that we're moving in the behavioral direction, but we need to then continue to bring just a little bit of awareness to reinforce that neuroplasticity to make that full shift to the autonomous behavior. No action is the right one. So individuals will act in ways that meet appetitive or adverse stimulus with an awareness of what they find valuable and satisfying. I think that's actually also a really important piece to this paper, is because in the moment, whether it's not knowing or it's a new moment, we never know what the right choice is, right? Which is why this idea of awareness and changes in neuroplasticity in the brain are so incredibly important, because our drive is to either meet the appetite of the good value or stay away from the punishment, right? So this practice of awareness or mindfulness can allow us to then shift to the goal alignment in novel ideas or something that we've never experienced before. So when in the areas where we don't know what the right choice is.
Daniel, can I ask a question? That basically is
Please.
It's basically saying, in other words, everybody has their own path and how they get to the end result, because you can't ever control it.
That's a great way of saying that. Absolutely. And I think that sits in two ways, is that everybody has their own path, and to them, they're building their own subjective experience. And I do think it is also drawing forward to say that, well, we may not know what the correct choice is in any moment, which is why we lean on the work of the neuroplasticity. We lean on the work of the awareness that we've been doing to help guide us to the path that would be good for us.
Well, you use the tools that you have as a coach to get to the end result with your client, but you can never control how that path and how it's going to get to that end result. So that's why it's you can use as much as you can, and hopefully the client's gonna adhere to it or not adhere to it, right?
Absolutely, you're right. Yeah, and I think what's so great, right, is about this paper is we as coaches, at least for me as a coach, I can then start to rest my hat on this idea of the spotlight or the awareness or the mindfulness, to know that I am supporting the client in building that autonomy. I am helping the client make changes, right, that could be in the brain, could be in the habits that we make, that are allowing them to move themselves on that path.
Right. But also because it's self-limiting beliefs will come into play in all of this, and you don't know what's going to arise from each individual client, and that's where a lot of the blockage happens.
Yeah. So then, well, let me finish up point 7. We'll get into this idea of how we can integrate it, right? Because there's a key of having a tool and integrating. So we'll go, and thank you for that. We'll finish up this slide here. We'll talk about the autonomous behavior may give rise to modulated rather than extreme behaviors, because it involves being aware of and flexibly responding to each moment. So autonomous behaviors, meaning behaviors that align with our goal, when awareness is brought in, it can give rise to this feeling of, well, we have a little bit more control, and we can moderate our response to them, as opposed to going to the extreme, eating all the cake, or whatever we've learned in our past. Maybe that's the idea of self-limiting beliefs coming in, right? Something like that. So the intervention would be asking individuals to become aware and take note of how they feel during and after engaging in these new behaviors. And I believe we have well, let's go through this conclusion page real quick before we move forward. So although individuals often know what behaviors are healthy, they struggle to change unhealthy behaviors. Again, we know that as coaches. Present moment awareness of actions and effects may result in a more sustainable route to behavior change and well-being. That's the awareness and mindfulness piece built in. Awareness can allow for the reward value of behaviors to be more accurately assessed and updated. That's the learning piece, the changing old ways of thinking, old ways of acting. That's the active learning piece that we talked about, reinforced learning. Providing an opportunity for behavior to shift to autonomously motivated and even intrinsically satisfying behaviors. Awareness can be used in the 7 specific points of intervention to leverage reward evaluation. Creates a natural shift from automatic and effortful, that's path B, to less effortful and more sustainable behaviors that is not reliant on willpower. That's where we ultimately want to move to. Path C, sustainable, not reliant on willpower. And that is the paper in a nutshell. I know there's a lot in that paper. I wanted us to come back to this framework now that we have seen or discussed all 7 of the pathways. What we can see now are the arrows simply show us where in the path that awareness would take place. So just an example of 1 or 2 would be the first one. That would be on path A on the left. We can see behavior is number 1. The awareness would come in between behavior and results. That red line moving up towards the left, the smaller one, not the bigger one, that would be point A, in which, again, we understand individuals become aware of the current behavior that is not aligned with long-term goals. From there, we can just move on and see where those ended up being. So 2 would be from results to trigger. And then again, we talked about 3, the trigger. We can't identify a trigger unless we understand the behavior or the results of the behavior coming for it. So 3 was the trigger, and so on and so forth. Then it moved to path B, then it moved to path C, etc. Maybe a good spot, and there was a lot of me talking. That leaves us with just a couple minutes left. Does anybody have any thoughts overall on the paper, how this could perhaps be applied or sit in our coaching toolbox, anything like that? I guess overall, do these make sense? Do these sit with what we know as coaches, whether we already knew it, whether we thought it might have been applied?
I'm late to the game here, but the second half of what you shared, Daniel, was awesome. I loved it. And it's interesting that we were talking about this today because it's something I've been working on, is like letting go of the outcome in coaching and remembering that the clients are in control. They're on their own path. So it was just helpful for me to like see all of this and be reminded, like, I know these things, but sometimes you have to be reminded, like, yeah, I don't have control. I can't force anything. I'm just there to guide. So I just feel empowered to keep doing what I'm doing. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, no problem at all. Great point. Yeah, so the first half was very science heavy. We always have to go into the discussion mechanism so that we can get to the intervention or what we want to apply there. Yeah.
I think this is interesting because, like, I have read The Power of Habit with the Habit Loop from Charles Duhigg. So it's like this takes that and really just expands upon it so much more than that. And it makes, not that it makes complete sense to me, but the dots are starting to connect. So it's like I need to go back and really read and absorb a lot of this information, because as I do with everything I learn in life, I apply it to my own behaviors, my own self and existence. And anybody else want cake right now? Like, what is the reward for having that? And what is the punishment I'm going to give myself? And where's the,
Yeah.
I think it's a really powerful, and now that we went through 1 through 7, going back to this figure, I'm like, I totally get it now. Like that really
Yeah.
helped. Like they put that way too early in the paper. They should have put that at
Yeah.
the end.
Right. I agree with you on that. No, very great points there, Geraldine. I think it's this idea that, like if I were to walk away with one thing, and I think you just said it there, was the awareness. It's for me, it's the metacognition, you call it. It's the thinking about thinking. It's the taking things that we do automatically, or our clients do automatically, bringing it to the forefront. And I guess a good word, in my opinion, would be inspecting it. And inspecting it in that nitty gritty, taking what Judd Brewer and his students did a little bit further than Duhigg was, I think he inspected this whole process, right? And then showed, which I thought was great, was showed the science of the brain changes that, like Caitlin said, we can rest our hat on, knowing that we are supporting our clients and them moving to path C and making it easier for them to do. Yeah. I thought this was an awesome paper. It's cool to see that the worlds of mindfulness meet behavior change and come together. And I think there's going to be a lot of good research that comes built on the backbone of this paper that came out 6 months ago. So this was a newer paper. Last time we talked about wanting to bring a couple, newer topics, newer ideas. The thing, when we do that, this is very heavily theory focused, right? So now what researchers are going to do is go out there and build a controlled trial where there's going to be an intervention of them testing point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4 to understand, well, maybe is one better than the other, so that we can get a little bit more efficient in helping our clients. Maybe the best approach to do is point 4 as opposed to point 2, etc. So good theory for us to rest our hats on as coaches. It can be a lot sometimes. It can be very dense.
It's very
appreciate the
complex, but
breakdown.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. If questions come up built off of this or thoughts, please feel free to ping me. Therese had messaged me, but I didn't get the chance to see it for actually a few weeks, so I'll be better at looking at my immediate inbox on Virtual Health Coaches there. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Daniel. I think that was fantastic.
Cool. Yeah, I hope we were able to take something away from it and be able to apply it in our toolbox.
Awesome. Well, everybody, thank you for joining, and y'all have a great week. Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
And gals.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.